Hello, everyone, and welcome to Venus in Gemini. I have been pretty sick with this bronchial kind of cold for over a week, and that was making it hard for me to get on and record with someone this week. So we're doing another solo episode about how and why I became a Pilates teacher full-time in New York City at the age of 21. And still I'm doing it to this day. This was 2011 that I was starting on this journey. I finished my Pilates teacher training, I think, in 2012. So, New York City, pretty different place back then. And there's two interesting pieces of information that are sort of origin story here. So one, when I was growing up, I loved to read. I devoured books. I would read all by myself, like all day on the weekend on Saturdays. But I had a hard time with traditional learning. I really didn't love school. I didn't love sitting there for 8 hours. That was hard for me. To this day, I do well with a more physical, kinesthetic kind of learning. There was that. I had a hard time with traditional school, always, through high school, through the whole thing. I did find some ways around that, but that's another story. Two, I grew up doing pageants, which people are always surprised to hear. And it's so far in my background now that I sometimes almost even forget about it. But it was a big part of my life. I did pageants from the age of 6 to 20. Like if you ever saw Toddlers and Tiaras, this was some similarity there. It was a very dramatized version, that show, but that's what I'm talking about here. Child beauty pageants and then like teenager beauty pageants as I got older. So those factor into this story because when I was 20, I had moved to the city and started taking some college classes because that was what you kind of had to do. That was the story that was being sold to me at the end of high school. If you didn't do this, you were going to be in trouble. I was experiencing more of the same that I had experienced in my schooling through elementary, middle, high school, which was that sitting at a desk and listening to a lot of lecture style of teaching was very, very hard for me. I was falling asleep. I was having a hard time retaining the information. It just wasn't working out great for me. At the same time, I was working at a very popular cupcake shop in Bay Ridge that then went and opened in Soho. And I was taking on more hours of that and having fun and making a lot of friends and just feeling like school wasn't working out for me. I also had moved to the city in the first place because I wanted to do something creative. I really wanted to act. I was a little bit scared, and I did get to that later on. But going to school was kind of the entryway in. It was kind of my reason for coming because I needed a reason to come. But it wasn't sticking. So I decided to take a break, which I was shocked that my parents were supportive of. And that made it feel like it made more sense for me. I think they could see that I was kind of burnt out and struggling. And around that time, I was still doing pageants. I was right at the end of it. But as you got older, pageants sort of shifted gears. The swimsuit competition, the fitness version of it, became a lot more important. So around the age of 16, I had started spending a lot of time in the gym, 2, sometimes 3 hours a day, doing cardio, doing weightlifting in a pretty healthy, structured way. But I was very bored. I just didn't love working out in that way 4 or 5 days a week. I was often reading on the treadmill, which was great, listening to music while I was lifting weights, but it was just taking up a lot of my day and I didn't love it. And I was hearing about Pilates around this time from a girl who I found quite inspiring. Her name was Alyssa Campanella. And I had actually gone to see her when I went to watch a friend compete in Miss Teen New Jersey, and Alyssa Campanella won, and she had this gorgeous red hair, and I thought she was so beautiful. And she went on to win Miss USA. And when she was training for Miss USA, she was doing a lot of Pilates, and she had talked about Pilates changed my whole body. And I was like, what is this Pilates? So I had to go find out. And at the same time, of course, nutrition was important too, because you can't do one without the other. So I was learning about what it meant to eat clean. I actually had this book called The Eat Clean Diet by Tosca Reno. If you were friends with me at all around the year circa 2010, you will remember me talking about Tosca Reno. She was this grandma, I think. She had children and grandchildren, and I believe she was from Arizona, and she competed in fitness competitions. I think she got into this later in life. And I would still recommend these books for anyone who is, like I was, just learning as a young adult about how to feed themselves, because they were pretty well laid out, pretty clear. And this was exploding my brain, because as someone, I think I've mentioned, who loves food and loves to eat and takes so much joy from that, learning about how you could also nourish your body while having fun eating was so exciting for me. So I was getting really excited about learning how to cook particularly healthy food. And that was opening my eyes to being healthy and being in shape could be fun. And that was making me become more and more passionate about the whole journey. And Pilates felt like it would kind of fit into that, because this girl was going on about how great Pilates felt and how much fun she was having doing it, and how it changed her relationship with her body and changed how her body looked so much. And that was very different than the experience I was having, of which I think a very classical, dedicated in the gym practice looked like for many years for many people. I think the story was that you had to suffer a little bit, and then it was blood, sweat, and tears. And also, the gym felt like a masculine place. And I think it still kind of does. It's not always the most feminine feeling space. So then when I went and tried Pilates for the first time, I was now working at the cupcake shop in Soho. And I was talking to this woman, Ellie, who used to come in for her morning coffee, about how I wanted to try Pilates. And she said, you have to go try Rehab down the street. It was Brooke Seiler's Pilates studio. She was a Pilates giant on the scene back in the day. Pilates in New York City was so different at that point in time. There's a lot of abs, arms, and ass style of Pilates, which is great and awesome and super fun too now. And there's a lot of mega former, let's make this as intense as we can Pilates. But back then, there was a lot of classical Pilates all over the city, which was and is this mysterious whole thing of its own form of exercise, which is still my preferred sort of Pilates. And if you haven't tried classical Pilates or are curious about it, I highly recommend just Googling like best classical Pilates in the area you live in and giving it a shot for a few weeks to see what you think, because it's so elegant in its composition, so incredible for longevity. And this ultimately is what made me fall in love with it. But I go to this OG classical Pilates studio down the block from the cupcake shop. And they had me doing these things that initially with my body, I was like, I will never be able to do this. Because one of the things classical Pilates is known for is kind of getting you into these positions where you use then these muscles that you didn't even know existed to do these movements that feel impossible. But then in learning to do them, it gets your body to create support for itself in all of those unexpected places, which is what makes it so good for longevity. Because if you're grabbing, twisting, doing an unexpected movement out in your life, your body is prepared for that from Pilates. So they're having me do all these weird movements. I'm like, I'll never be able to do this. I keep going. And before I know it, I was doing them. And this was very exciting to me. Now, Pilates for a 20-year-old living in New York City, which was already an expensive endeavor, was also quite expensive. So I was going around to all the Pilates places in the city and trying to get their little intro deals if they had them. This was pre-class pass even. I'm like, how am I going to sustain this? Because I love this. And then I just said, oh, I guess I could become a Pilates teacher because I saw that part of being a Pilates teacher was you could take the Pilates classes for free. And I was 20 and I was taking a break from school. So this made sense. And then the next thing I knew, I was teaching Pilates pretty much full time, which looked like teaching 30-ish hours a week, which I look back, I'm like, how did I do that? I teach sometimes 8 hours in a day, like in a row without a break. And when you're teaching Pilates, you talk basically the entire time. But that was about the amount of hours that it would take to make ends meet at that stage of my career. The way that most teachers were doing it then too was they were teaching at different places. So on average, I think I'd be teaching at 3 different facilities at the same time. Mainly, I taught at Plank Fitness. And shout out to anyone who listens who used to come to Plank because you remember how magical and special and quirky and weird and Lower East Side it was. It was the best. But I was teaching at Plank, a good bulk. I taught at Equinox for quite many years, 6th Street Pilates, Core Pilates NYC. There were a few others too, but I was hustling around the city. And I remember when I did my Pilates teacher training at Core Pilates NYC, they did tell me they were like, in the early years of your career, you will be hustling around the city. And I was. And that was also fun. And that kept me feeling healthy too, because I wasn't sitting at a desk. I was up and I was active. And that felt good. And as someone who had never been a non-traditional learner and was becoming increasingly enthusiastic about health, this was a really good fit. The other thing about it that was a great fit, it did change my relationship with my body. It turned it from being about aesthetic appreciation to aesthetic appreciation and appreciation for all that it could do and for the relationship of trust that I could have with it. Pilates gave me a lot of trust in my body because I think getting that sort of education where I spent basically a year studying movement and studying anatomy and looking at different bodies. We would also practice a lot of touch cues and looking at if you touch a body this way, you can help to support it into this position. And you try to move it in a way that isn't supportive, all the ways that you could potentially injure someone's body or how they could injure their own body. That gave me so much new insight into thinking of how I was using my body all the time in ways that were healthy and ways that were not, and shifting into ways from that place of knowing that were better for me, which still serves me enormously to this day. Another thing that was really cool about it was that I feel like I got X-ray vision from all these years of teaching, because at this point I have spent well over 1,000 hours watching bodies, just watching them move through the same movements over and over again. Guys, please forgive me if my thoughts aren't stringing together the most cohesively today, because since I have been sick and I do love Pilates and I have so much to say about it, I feel like I'm firing off a little. And it made sense because of this, and it was cool because of this, and Pilates is great because of that. This is sort of an origin story episode, and as I'm early into recording this podcast, this is going to help you get to know me a little bit better and about one of the things that has helped me to stay engaged and excited and enthusiastic about life over many years. One of the things I've been at the longest and the most consistently. So thanks for bearing with me. So if I think about why I stuck with it for such a long time, why I'm still stuck with it, one, it's a pretty great job. At this point, I teach one-on-one. So I teach clients in home for an hour at a time. I also teach yoga too. We'll do a yoga episode because that's a big part of the story and complementary to the Pilates story. But I have incredible relationships with my clients. They inspire me. They are wonderful people. They work hard. It's very rewarding to see them feel good in their bodies and to see Pilates help them to feel more healthy and to see the different directions they go on in their own health journeys aside from Pilates too. How people put things together in different ways because every client I have has a different what makes up their wellness bucket of their life. And that's cool to see. Some people play sports. Some people do traditional gym style workouts. Some people run. Some people cycle. Some people exclusively do Pilates. Some are into the nutrition aspect of it. Some people aren't. And I also get to hear about the back ends of their lives too, which is so interesting. I have gotten to learn about all of these different career choices and ways of setting up families and different parts of the world, clients from all over the world. I have clients in different age brackets. It's really cool to see people living their life health-wise and otherwise in an intimate way at different seasons of life. One of my clients is 80 and a total badass. I have a lot of clients that are new moms. I have a lot of middle-aged men, and that's really interesting because that's a demographic that's pretty different from me. And it's cool to get that inside view to what people's lives are like. I feel like the things you end up hearing about, it's a little bit maybe like being a hairdresser, which my mom's a hairdresser. I get to have a really inside look, and that feels very special. And it's an honor to have that with people and to be able to support them. Another thing that kept me at teaching Pilates, keeps me at it, is you are generally, in my experience and my peers' experience, a private contractor, which means you are a freelancer, which means you more or less work for yourself. Even if you're working at a studio, it's usually that way. Con of that, you have to figure out your own health insurance. You have to figure out your own retirement savings. That's very important should you go down this path, to give that some thought so that you're set up in the way with that someone with a traditional job would be. And there are definitely ways that you can do that. The cool thing about essentially working for yourself is getting to have control and flexibility in your schedule, which allowed me to fall back in love with learning because it opened up this space for me to pursue learning about different things while I was also working full time. So while I've worked full time as a Pilates teacher, I have studied pretty intensively acting for film and theater, being a doula, which I practiced for many years also, being an astrologer, which I've talked about. I've professionally practiced astrology too, doing my 200 and 500-hour yoga teacher trainings, which I actively teach yoga also. There were several years where I was doing theater performances, acting in plays, and having the schedule of being a Pilates teacher allowed me to have time for rehearsals and the performances that I was doing and have a stable and rewarding full-time job also. So that's pretty awesome. Of course, New York City has been a perfect place for this because there are so many people here. There are a lot of work opportunities here. I don't know that this would have looked the same in a different city, but Pilates is really increasing in popularity and also in digital consumption. So ever the opportunity out there, if this should sound like something that is interesting to you. And above all, I don't think anything could replace what it's given me just for myself and for my own life, mainly in the way of trust in my own movement practice and enthusiasm for my own health and how it bolstered that and changed a relationship that felt a bit like drudgery when it came to movement. And also, guys, for me struggling with traditional education, I failed gym class 3 times in high school. There was a lot of reasons for that, but I never played a full game of sports in my whole life until I was in my mid-20s. And then to become someone whose career is centered around fitness was just so expansive for me, because I think a lot of times in life we tell ourselves, oh, I'm not that kind of person. And we write something off, and we could be any kind of person that we want. And I'm glad that I was able to overcome that limiting belief that movement and fitness and health were things that were kind of stuffy and boring and sacrificial and drudgery. And Pilates played a big part in me being able to do that. So to have found it at a young age, to have crossed paths with a couple people who pinged my attention in that direction, has been an enormous blessing that then helped connect me into so many of the other huge blessings in my life. It's a career and a practice and a discipline that has given me so much, and I know it's given so much to other people too. So if you're listening to this and you haven't tried Pilates, or you're curious, or if you're thinking about maybe I want to take a Pilates teacher training, even if you think you might not ever want to teach, 10 out of 10 recommend. I don't think that you would ever regret it. I also wound up teaching in a Pilates teacher training program for a few years, and pretty much everyone I knew who came out of it was super glad that they did it. And if you're interested in the origins of Pilates, do a little research about Joseph Pilates. He was a super interesting guy. A lot of people don't even realize that Pilates is named after a person, which it is. Came into its initial popularity circa World War II. Pilates has deep roots in New York City, particularly because Joseph Pilates moved to New York City from Germany. He also authored several books, one of them Return to Life. Super short, but a great introduction from Pilates, right from the horse's mouth of the guy who started it. And again, I know Pilates is getting so popular now, there is surely a class around you to go try it. One more thing I'll say about it is that having the right teacher can make a world of difference. So if you try your first time and you don't totally get it, that's super normal. Give it a few tries. If you could even give it up to 10 tries, because as I said earlier in the episode, I think Pilates is kind of weird intentionally. That's why it's good for you, because it's strengthening all these parts of our body that we often don't think about. And that creates safety and also space in our body. And that's my little Pilates soapbox, a little bit of my origin story, some fun facts. Thank you guys for being with me and listening and going on this solo journey with me while I get over being sick. And I'll be back next week with another human being, which I'm excited about. And I hope you guys have a great week, great start to spring. Hope you stay healthy and that you're able to avoid any little early spring colds. Sending love, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for listening to Venus and Gemini. If this episode resonated, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe or leave a review or share it with someone you love. Until then, see you guys next time.